Hello and welcome back to PC Retro Tech. Today's video is the second in our series on this very interesting Tandy 1000 machine for Tandy. If you haven't seen the first video in the series, you might want to check it out at the link above. Now in today's video I want to look at some of the games that really defined this machine, that took great advantage of its 16 color graphics and 3-voice sound. Now there's a couple of other minor things that I want to deal with. It was damaged in shipping and one of the ISA slots has been snapped. I want to try and repair that. And there are also some printers that came along with it which were badly damaged, which I'll show on the channel. And then I have some manuals which are in very nice condition, so I definitely want to show those off. But one of the main things I want to deal with today is a bit of a mystery. It turns out that the brightness and contrast knobs of this monitor have been jammed. Now I don't mean that they're just a little bit stiff or grinding against the plastic. I mean they're totally stuck, almost as though it were deliberate. So I want to try and get to the bottom of exactly what's happened there. And then I want to understand the graphics subsystem of this machine a little bit better with a view to programming it in the future. It's an extension of TGA, as you know, which was only 4 colors, but this has 16 colors. So how is that color information generated from the information in video memory? How's the video memory laid out? And how fast is it? Did they really make any improvements over CGA in that department? So a lot of things to look into there. But before we get into any of that, I really want to try and get rid of that ugly stain on the system unit. Let me see if I've got some chemicals that'll lift that off. Well, I've already had a go with some alcohol wipes, and you can see there's a kind of yellow mark now on the rag. So I think it is starting to break that down. So my theory is that a little bit of IPA might actually be sufficient to lift this. Those alcohol wipes just have a very low concentration of alcohol. So let's give this a bit of a scrub and see what we can get here. And actually, look at that. That is actually just coming off as though it were nothing. Fantastic. This will look much better. Obviously the whole thing needs retro brighting, and unfortunately the sun is really just not out for very long at all today, so I'm not going to be able to get to that today, but I will try and do some retro brighting during the week and see if I can get rid of some of the yellow in the plastic here. But doesn't that look better? You can see that obviously someone stuck a sticker on there. You can tell from the lightness of the plastic, but the rest of it's going to require some more serious chemicals, I think, to get the colour back to normal. Well, it's already hard to believe that this is the same machine, but off camera I went over this with a bunch of facial wipes and a whole load of IPA. And as you can see, it's taken off literally gobs of grime that's accumulated over the years. And it's interesting to wonder how much of the retro brightening that we do is just bleaching a patina that builds up over the machines, a kind of electrostatically stuck grease and dust layer, and how much of it is actually changing the chemistry of the plastic itself. Certainly in this case, more than 50% of the appearance was just down to grime, and perhaps it's even more than that if I put more time into cleaning the plastic work. There were entire surfaces of the CRT which are totally white now, that were really yellow before. Not so much the front of the machine, unfortunately. But I did leave the mouse untouched, just so that I can show you on camera how much of a difference IPA will make. Well, I changed the white balance here just so that it really shows up clearly how yellow this is. This is a little bit more exaggerated than it really is in real life, but with normal white balance it's the opposite. So what I'm going to do is just go over this with IPA, and I'm really using quite a lot of it on the rag here. And I think you can see that already a lot of that yellowing is just starting to disappear. Now it's not going away completely, and I imagine that there is a even finer layer of patina here which is even more stubborn than the layer that we're actually removing abrasively and chemically. So that probably does need something stronger and maybe even some sunlight to do some bleaching. But it is impressive just how far you can get if you're prepared to really lather the IPA onto this. Well, I've gone back to a more normal white balance, which does more closely approximate what I'm seeing with my eyes. And I've been over this region with a few other chemicals, just household cleaners of various kinds, to see if anything would make a substantial difference. It does seem like the longer you spend trying to clean it, the brighter it gets, but nothing really makes a radical difference over just IPA. And if we compare the side, which is untouched, with the top, we can now see pretty clearly the difference between nothing at all IPA and then additional cleaning. Now the next thing I want to deal with is this ISA slot, and you can see the front of it has been snapped clean off in shipping. So what happened is the very heavy hard card has lurched forwards while the rest of the machine came to an abrupt halt as it collided with something, either inside the luggage hold or perhaps even on the tarmac itself. Now I have the piece that snapped off, and so I'm going to try gluing that back in place, and we'll see if we can restore that socket. When I first got this machine, the metalwork was all bent, and I had to straighten that out from the collision. And in addition, I thought that the hard card wasn't working at all. The machine itself wouldn't even boot. And it turned out that it just wasn't aligned with the socket anymore. It had slipped all the way forwards. And so it was very clear what had actually happened. Well, close-up shots like this are a bit tricky on camera. In fact, I'm already spilling superglue here. So what I'm going to do is just use a little applicator here to get some glue and then dab it onto the actual piece. And I'm just going to dab it where I can see plastic that's broken, so it'll glue the two halves together. This is really a little bit difficult to do if you try and do it directly with the superglue container, because it'll just basically spray superglue all over everything, including your hand. So I'm just doing it here on the pieces that I can see with an applicator. So I think that's enough. I'm going to now stick it in the machine and hold it for about 10 minutes. Well, 10 minutes might have been a bit of overkill. Now my finger's completely stuck to the thing. I'm just kidding. So anyway, it looks pretty good now. It's really quite well connected. So I think the real acid test will be if I put a card in that, will the end pop off? So let's give that a go and see what happens. And it seems to have stayed on, so I'm pretty happy with that. I don't know how much structural integrity it has, and I'm certainly not going to drop the machine with the hard card in it to find out, but yeah, this looks pretty solid now. Well, it's time to get to the bottom of this monitor mystery. So the contrast and brightness knobs are at the front here and look like they should be fairly accessible. So what I'm going to do is just take the cover off. I already took out the 8 screws, that hold this on. So let's just get that aside and see if we can actually see the contrast and brightness knobs in there. And it looks like they are accessible, so that's a good thing. So I'm going to defang this off camera. These are quite dangerous to work on, and once I've done that, we'll get to it and see what we can find out. Well, no big sparks given off when I defanged this thing. That probably means the safety equipment in this is working quite well. It would not be the first monitor where it hasn't been functioning, but in this case seems to be. So these are the brightness and contrast knobs that I'm talking about. They're just little potentiometers, and the knobs are attached through to the front of the monitor. I don't see anything obvious wrong at this point, so what I'm going to do is actually just take out the little board that they are screwed to and see if I can figure out why these things don't turn anymore. So I'm probably going to have to unsolder the wires from the potentiometers to get this out of here, but I think that's not going to be a big job, and then we'll take a look and see what's actually wrong with it. Well, remarkably, I didn't actually need to unsolder these. It came out and the wires are really quite long enough. And really surprisingly, these pots are both just completely stuck. I've not seen anything like this before and don't have a good explanation for what's going on. So let's get the knobs off this and see what we can see. And I am seeing something that looks like glue here, which is a bit strange. And It's a bit hard to tell whether or not there's really glue in the actual... I imagine there has to be. I don't see any other explanation for that. I wonder if I can get this unstuck or not. I'm going to have a fiddle round off camera and just see whether I can force this loose without snapping it. It seems to me that someone has glued these in place, but what would possibly be the reason for that? Did they have trouble with things blowing up when the pots were turned all the way to one extent? I don't know. So I'm just going to have a fiddle and see what I can figure out. Well, I can scarcely believe my luck. I got a wrench and I put some paper towel in its jaws, and that enabled me to get quite a lot of leverage on these, and it didn't actually take that much at all to get them to unstick. And now I can turn this one quite freely with my fingers. This one's a little bit more stiff, but I can turn it, and certainly with a knob on there, this one, well, it's still a little bit stiffer than I would like, but definitely functional for sure. So I'm going to lubricate these and see if I can't restore them to full working order. Well, great success. This now moves very, very freely. No problems at all, and certainly with a knob on there, absolutely perfect. So I'm going to get all this back together and then we'll see whether there was a reason these were actually glued. While I'm here, it's a good opportunity to look at some of this brown marking that's on the inside of the monitor case. And just like the outside, I imagine that this is just dust and grime that's been stuck electrostatically over the years. If you're worried that I'm going to be removing some kind of X-ray protective layer or something, it's pretty clear that this has been applied after the cover has been put on the monitor, so I'm pretty certain that this is not installed at the factory. So let's just see what happens when I try to wipe some of this away with IPA. And amazingly, it just wipes off. It's really just dust and grime, I think. So I'm going to get to this and clean it up just a little bit on the inside. I'm not going to go too much into this. It's really not worthwhile since you don't see the inside. But that does show exactly what it was like on the outside of the monitor when I cleaned it. A lot of this brown goo just wiped straight off. Now, I think we might have been successful here. Let's just play around with these knobs and see. Yeah, look, that's working. Brilliant. And I don't see any major issues with this. That actually seems to be functioning perfectly. So that was a successful repair. Now, what I want to do this time is to play around with some of the knobs on the back of the machine and see if we can get rid of some of that moiré pattern that we were seeing when we were running ScanDisk. Well, if you're wondering how I'm behind the monitor and still able to adjust it here, just using a mirror. Now, I think this one is just the horizontal position, and unfortunately all that's really happening there is it's moving the image side to side. Not very useful as far as moiré is concerned. And the next adjustment, as far as I can tell, is vertical size. And what a shame, it's not making any difference. So on some monitors that does actually affect the moiré. So unfortunately we're going to have to give up on that. The only other adjustment here is vertical hold, and well, I've learned my lesson from playing with those. So this is not going to be solvable just with an adjustment, and I've actually read that some monitors just blur the image to get rid of the moiré. I think I prefer to have a sharper image for most of the graphics and the occasional moiré, to be honest. Interestingly enough, you can see the ScanDisk has actually found a bad sector here, which didn't show up the first time I scanned it. But you remember when I formatted this drive, if you watched the previous video, I did actually have some points where it tried to recover some allocation units while formatting. Unfortunately, it's not where there's any data on the disk at the moment, so it's good to have it flagged off now. Anyway, we've tried, but I don't think there's anything we can do for this moiré. Unfortunately, there are no service manuals for the CM5 monitor. There are for some of the other Tandy monitors, but just not this one, as far as I've been able to tell. So we're pretty much stuck with this issue, I think. Well, guess what I found, guys? I actually have another cable without the ground pin snapped off. If you watched the previous video, you know that the main machine had the ground pin missing from the power outlet cord. So great news. I can plug this in, and It really won't make that much difference, but if anything shorts to the case, it should blow a fuse, and thanks to some viewers who pointed that out, it should make it just a little bit safer. Well, I did promise to show off these beautifully preserved Tandy 1000 manuals. There's something just fantastic about manuals written in the 1980s, isn't there? So it starts off with setting up your computer, the system unit and keyboard, floppy disk drives and joystick. The main portion of the manual is actually on MS-DOS and BASIC, and then a huge section on DeskMate, which must have been the software that came with it. And at the back there's actually some interesting sections adding memory, a math coprocessor, an option board, the built-in video hardware, which I'm certainly going to look at some point, and adding an optional video board so you can actually disable the on-board video and put in your own VGA card, for example, and video and interrupt switches. So interesting stuff. Now, I don't have time to cover everything in this manual, so I'm just going to flip through it very quickly, just to really show how beautifully presented it is. Section on MS-DOS here, and then we get into DeskMate, which just goes on and on and on forever. It's huge, covering every program in DeskMate in detail. Then there's a telecommunications section and a phone program for storing phone numbers. And there's a really interesting one called Mail, which looks like some kind of electronic mail system, perhaps just user to user. I'm not really sure if this was done on a server or not. I haven't read this in detail, but it is obviously some kind of email type affair. So that was really interesting, and then just much more about the DeskMate programs and so on. This really just goes on forever and ever. And then at the very back, there is a set of appendices with some technical information and, of course, a very thorough index. So that's the practical guide, and then you have the quick reference, which is equally well presented. Covers the MS-DOS commands, one of the best presentations of MS-DOS commands that I've seen. And then, of course, there's things like debug and also, I think, an editor called Edlin, which they cover. Really interesting that they go into so much detail about those. And then we have the basic language, which is equally detailed. Really fantastic stuff. So yeah, what a lovely set of manuals to have with the machine. Absolutely fantastic. So that's the quick reference and practical guide to the Tandy 1000. Now, I also promised to show off the printers that I got with this. The first one is just a basic DMP133 dot matrix printer, which seems to be a Tandy affair. And unfortunately, as you can see, it suffered some terminal damage in shipping. It's really in a very bad state of repair. Everything is cracked. Even the rod that holds things together is snapped out of there. This is actually not from this printer, it's from the other printer. It's a set of letters, actually, that get pressed against the paper. So that's a very interesting printer, which I'll show you in a moment. But yeah, there's all sorts of bits of broken plastic and so on. Unfortunately, not even all of the bits are there, so I can't even just glue it back together. I don't know if I'll ever get this working, unfortunately. I think it has suffered so much damage as to be unusable, but it's interesting to take a look, at least after all of these years, at the sort of printer that people might have got with the machine. But let me show you a printer which a lot of people would not have got with a Tandy. Well, this massive old beast, which barely fits on my bench here, is a Tandy Daisy Wheel printer, DWP230. Even has a switch on the front to control the pitch, and I'm betting you had to have some serious dollars to get one of these with your machine back in the day. Beautiful piece of equipment. It has sustained some damage. There is a cracked cover here, and I think internally things are not quite 100% either, but this one might be repairable at some point. This has a weird connector on it, and I'm really a bit mystified about this. So one of the viewers on the previous video said that the edge connector I saw on the main board is actually for plugging a printer in, but both of the printers have this kind of connector, and unfortunately I don't really know exactly how this plugs into the machine. So that is yet to be determined, but yeah, let's take a look inside this thing. Well, lighting and camera angles are a bit of a challenge here, I have to admit. What you're seeing at the bottom here is the lid, which doesn't open any further. But what you can see here is the print wheel. And how do you change the font on a printer like this? Why, of course you just change the plastic wheel. There's a little mechanism that pushes up against these and pushes them against the paper, obviously with a ribbon in there, which there isn't currently. There's one sitting down in the bottom of the printer, and presumably that should be somewhere sitting on top. I haven't quite figured out the exact configuration, and as I said, there is some damage to this. So yeah, a really interesting piece of equipment. So this is the Courier 10 font, and the other one that I showed you earlier, which is actually missing its lid, unfortunately it fell down the elevator shaft in my apartment, is Script 12. So those are the two fonts that I have available for this. So I do think that getting this working one day might be a very interesting project and might make an interesting video. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that. Well, I've already started looking into the Tandy graphics adapter, or TGA for short. Apparently that isn't its official name, but that's what everyone calls it anyway. It's apparently very similar to the PC Junior graphics adapter, although they're technically not 100% compatible. So from what I can tell, it uses 128 kilobytes of shared RAM. So there's a special controller that sort of mediates between the graphics adapter and the system for this 128K. Now, it doesn't mean that you have 128 kilobytes in a graphics mode. There's usually 16 or 32K. And I'm very interested to know whether you can use the rest for anything, although apparently one of the banks is actually used for the interrupt vector table, so you certainly don't want to be overriding that. So it's typically not used for graphics, from what I can see. Now, unlike the PC Junior, apparently the Tandy graphics adapter is quite fast, so I'm looking forward to doing some timings, and I think I will do that momentarily, and we'll get to find out. So there's two modes of interest. There's a 320 by 216 color mode, and of course we've seen that in games. It looks fantastic. But I didn't realize there's apparently also a 640 by 200 4 color mode, which certainly makes sense, but unfortunately I can't confirm that right at the moment. The Tandy reference manual is absolutely littered with errors. In some places it says, a whole bunch of stuff, and then, oh, but this is only available on the PC Junior, which is a strange thing to put in a Tandy reference manual. And in other places it just has completely contradictory information, or obviously wrong information. I think at one point it claimed to have a 640 by 200 16 color medium resolution mode, which is clearly rubbish. So I'm just going with what I've read, which I think is correct, and we'll have to verify. So the interesting thing is that the palettes it uses are programmable. So from what I understand, you can actually order the 16 colors however you want when in a 16 color mode, and even in the 4 and 2 color modes, you can actually choose those colors to be any of the 16. And in the 2 color mode, that's particularly interesting because you can't even change the background color on CGA, let alone make it one of 16 colors. It's always black on CGA, so that's quite interesting. Now, apparently the chipset is actually Motorola 6845 compatible. Now, why is this interesting? Well, apparently the CGA card uses a Motorola 6845, and they wanted it to be compatible with this. So they've used their own custom chip for this, an 84-pin chip, which they call a megacell, from what I can tell. But they wanted it to be as compatible as possible with CGA, so it really emulates this very well. And unfortunately the manual wasn't very clear at this point, but it seemed to be able to emulate multiple different kinds of 6845, but it wasn't clear whether that was just different revisions of their own chip or whether it was configurable in hardware only or software. I just don't know. So that will be interesting to look into. And I guess we should be able to identify this chip just by looking inside the box and seeing which one it is. But yeah, this has a nice set of registers that we understand very well. It allows you to do a whole load of interesting effects and also to set up some really cool graphics modes. So I'm looking forward to playing around with this because it's something that I kind of understand already. Now, some information I wasn't able to verify yet. Apparently it has, in the 320 by 200 16 color mode, 4 banks of 8 kilobytes of memory. Now, that may seem a little bit random, but in the TGA card you have 2 banks of 8 kilobytes. And basically all of the even lines on the screen come in memory before all of the odd lines. So if you're moving down the screen one line at a time, you have to keep switching banks, which is actually a bit of a pain in the neck when you're programming it, especially if you're drawing lines or circles or something like that on the screen. So this is a complication in CGA, but it's actually worse in TGA. You have 4 banks that you have to switch between. So that'll be interesting to see how much more of a complication that is if you really want to write fast code. The compensating factor is that there are 4 bits per pixel, so there's only 2 pixels per byte. And I have actually tried this sort of thing out with CGA and just combined pairs of pixels together so that I have an effective 2 pixels per byte, and that makes things a lot easier to deal with in the horizontal direction. So I am looking forward to trying this out because it seems like it should be an improvement over CGA. So I don't know whether one of these things is going to compensate for the other. Almost certainly it will, and so that's going to be interesting just to get some experience with it. So basically on our sister channel, I just recently made a video. PC Retro Programmer is the channel, and this was about making a linearly addressed mode for CGA. So in other words, we don't have this, well, 2-bank nonsense in CGA in that case, although I wasn't able to get a full screen resolution in that. It's just a half screen window, if you like. So check that out if you're interested in really technical details. That's PC Retro Programmer here on YouTube. And so I'm going to be very, very interested to see whether I can get a kind of linearly addressed mode out of the Tandy graphics adapter. So many things to try in so little time. It's really going to be fun. But anyway, now what I want to do is try the speed of this thing, and I think the best tool to use for that is TopBench. Well, here we are in TopBench, and let's first of all just look at some database entries before we get to the timings for this exact machine. So a stock Tandy 1000 SX, which is submitted by someone else, has a video memory speed, you'll see it there under VidMem, of 1731 microseconds. Now lower is better here, so this is a time, and so this is really quite good. But now let's look at another submitted database entry with a 286 Express card in one of these machines, which I have in this machine, by the way. So 1232 microseconds, much lower, and obviously a big improvement. So let's check what this machine will do, and in fact, as you can see, it's exactly 1232. So it's not a surprise, this has a 286 Express card in it, and it's currently activated. So let me now go up to the earlier part of this database where we have the IBM PC 5150, and I'll find a version that has a CGA card. There's one there, and you can see that that VidMem speed is now 2648, so more than twice as slow. So I am really looking forward to playing around with this Tandy 1000. Of course, you actually have 32 kilobytes of memory in the 320-200 16 color mode instead of the 16 kilobytes you'd have on a CGA card in a 4 color mode. So it really have twice as much memory to fill, so it better be twice as fast. So really you're only going to get about the same frame rate, but still I think that's a pretty impressive improvement over a genuine IBM CGA card. So I think I was a little bit unkind to some of the games that I showed in the previous video. I showed Castlevania and said that it had very slow scrolling, which it does, and then showed Double Dragon, which clearly scrolled much better. And I said that this was mostly down to the size of the screen window that was being used. And actually Castlevania also, if you look at it, had a slightly less than full screen window. So although Double Dragon got some benefit from that, Jim Leonard, the author of Top Bench, assures me that Double Dragon is in fact coded much better than Castlevania, and so this actually accounts for most of the performance difference between those games. Anyway, speaking of games, I think it's time to finish out this video with another game showing off the fantastic graphics capabilities of this machine. I've only got time for one this week, but I'll try and put some more in the next few videos. Well, this game is a viewer suggestion. It's called WiBArM, and released in 1989. Oh, I love the music. That's fantastic. Let me just put the microphone near to the computer so you can hear this. Isn't that fantastic? I really love that music. That is great. I can't wait to play this game. Let's get into this and see what it's like. Well, the in-game music here is pretty good as well, and I'm really impressed with the graphics. They look really fantastic. So what I'm going to do is just start the game off and see what happens. It actually asks for a user diskette, which I've got in drive A at the moment. I don't know whether that will slow it down at all. Oh, look, we can fly around in, well, all directions by the looks of it. It's really two-dimensional, pretty amazing. And if I press the space bar, something happened there. I turned into something else. Looks like a flying iron or something. Oh, now I am a man. Okay, so spacebar changes whether you're flying or whether you're a man. So let's see if we can find something interesting here. So there's something. What if I just collide with it? Oh, there's a little in-game thing here. Oh, well, that didn't last very long. So yeah, I haven't actually figured out how to attack or fire weapons or anything like that at this point. So I think I might have just died actually. Yep, WiBArM was destroyed. So I have to figure out how to play this game now. Well, apparently the main controls in this game are space and escape, and escape brings up a menu. So what I'm going to do now is try and find one of those side games, and we'll see if pressing the escape brings up something interesting. So apparently this game was released originally in 1986 for the NEC PC-88, and then it was ported to DOS in 1989, or at least released then, and so this is the DOS version that we're playing here. And I have to say the graphics are absolutely incredible, really, really fantastic. So now I'm going to press escape and I should get a menu. So yeah, I have a weapon that I can choose. So let's try the micro beam. I don't really see very much happening there. I am firing something, but well, that was interesting. I don't know exactly what happened there. I don't know whether I destroyed any enemies or not. It doesn't really seem to give me a tally. So let's try and find another game, a side game. This looks like one coming up here. So let's fight these guys and see if we do any better here. Oh, we got one. Okay, so it does work. Yeah. interestingly enough, I've run out of energy. So yeah, that was a short game. Anyway, so I'm obviously not very good at playing this game, but I think this gives you an idea of what this is like. Fantastic music, and the graphics are amazing. The really interesting thing about this is just how varied it is. I mean, you've got the flying scenes at the beginning, where you get to fly around, and then you have these little side games, which are really, it's a combination of different kinds of games. So yeah, very impressed with this. It was pretty obvious at the beginning that it was very popular in Japan, but I wonder how many people played this on the Tandy back in the day. Let me know if you've seen this one before in the comments. Anyway, that's really all I have time for this week. Obviously, next week I'm going to be trying to program the Tandy 1000, in particular the graphics mode, and I already have some ideas for that, so don't forget to subscribe if you want to see that, if you're not already. And thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in a later video. Bye!